Welcome to Portsmouth This Week. This is September 14th of 2012. I'm Jeff Richard hosting today's program, and with me is our town administrator, John Klimm.
Hello.
Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing how your week went. Things have always been busy here, but since you've arrived, I imagine you haven't stopped running at all. So many things going on. Well, it's sort of a notion of trying to decide, how your week went, and the several things that have to be done here in town to do that. So let me start with a question. Our town tax assessor, Dave Dolch, has indicated that he is moving on. He's
Yes.
given notice. Tell us, you're in the process then of searching out a new tax assessor, and are there other administrative duties that this tax assessor has that may be unique that are making that issue more difficult for you?
There is. If you look at the communities all across New England, it's relatively rare to see a combination of a position that includes both tax assessing and collection. And so while that is a provision within our charter, that has posed some challenges because there are a lot of competent tax collectors out there, and there are a lot of competent assessors. There are very few that have expertise in both areas. We are primarily interested in someone that has the most experience in the assessing field. That's the most complex, most difficult to learn over a short period of time. And the reality is we have a terrific staff in our collection office that know intimately the day-to-day operations, and so we're blessed to have competent staff there. But I think that if you look at the number of applications that we received, I know because I received phone calls from folks both prior to the deadline and after the fact from folks that just said that they just didn't apply because of the lack of experience in one of the two major areas. So I would hope that that is an area that a future charter commission takes a look at, because as I said, if you look outside of Rhode Island to New England and even nationally, it's a relatively unique combination, and an argument certainly can be made. You see more communities that have the collection function within the realm of finance as opposed to assessing or whatever.
Yeah.
But
how does vision appraisal factor into this equation?
Well, fortunately, that's a very popular system, and so I think every single person that applied had experience in that software program, so that isn't going to be a problem. Additionally, because the timetable that we were given from the departure of Mr. Dolch was so short, that we found ourselves in a position of needing an interim collector assessor, and we were blessed to have the recently retired assessor from Newport, Alan Booth, step up to the plate. So he'll be starting on Monday in a part-time capacity, and we're really blessed to have someone with his experience fill in for us while we go through the evaluation process.
Super, that's great. Well, that's all good news and bad news kind of situation. We'll miss Dave, but
he really gave many good years to the town. I was saddened to hear of his departure. He's taken a position in the private sector, which is in his best interest and his family's, but you always hate to see hard-working, dedicated employees
you're used to seeing the same happy faces all the time when you
Yes.
go to tall. It's tough. How is the operational audit of the fire department going?
We're doing two things, as you know. We have undertaken an operational audit, which is in the process of being completed, and at the same time we are filling the position of chief. We have gone through a very comprehensive process and are beginning to look at some finalists for the position. I'm very pleased thus far at not only the numbers of people that have applied, but the breadth of experience, including certainly some local residents that have applied. So we'll be making a decision, I think, over the next month or two in that regard. The audit itself, the auditors have come to town. They've interviewed a wide variety of people, from existing employees and the leadership of the fire department to department representatives from neighboring towns to our friends over in Prudence Island and the like. So they're in the process of compiling information, comparing our operation to like communities, not only in Rhode Island, but also in New England. And I think that because of who we hired to undertake this task, I'm very hopeful that we'll get a really comprehensive, objective 30,000-foot view of our operation. And it's not designed to criticize, but to be helpful to look towards the future.
Once the report is handed to you, how does the public at large get a chance to see what's in this thing?
Well, it is a public document. We certainly will put it on the website, circulate it to the town council and to members of the general public. I certainly will be discussing it here on TV and through other forms of media. We want to get the ideas and concepts of the audit out there. Certainly not every one is going to be applicable to us, and there are reasons why some can be adopted and some not. What I've always said to employees of the fire department, though, is that it really doesn't matter how many recommendations there are. The real challenge is what we do with those recommendations. And so I'm delighted that every member of the department has taken this as a positive step forward, and I think they're very anxious to see what recommendations come forward, because those are the folks that are there day in and day out, and some of those good ideas are coming from them, so I really appreciate that.
On a related subject, we were looking at the budget last year and noticing that the overtime lines were kind of excessive in many views. How are you managing the overtime at this point in time?
Well, two things. First of all, Chief Cranston has done a great job at reporting to me weekly in terms of overtime expenditures. He's doing everything possible within the constraints of the contract, I think much more aggressively than we've seen in the past, to keep overtime in line. He also presented to the town council several weeks ago a very creative proposal, because one of the areas where you see the highest amount of overtime being used is when you have an opening and you have to go through a lengthy process of filling a position, and while you're doing that you have to backfill, and that creates a tremendous amount of overtime. He's come forward with a really creative program of having an academy prior to the openings, so that the amount of time that the department is, that's right, yeah. There isn't this 6-month or 1 year lag between the opening and the filling, and so I give him a tremendous amount of credit for that innovation, and it's something that has been embraced by the town council.
Pretty good. We're about almost through the first quarter of your first personally impacted budget. I assume that you've got something in place to track how well that budget is doing. How is it doing in your view?
Well, I give a lot of credit to Dave Fauscher and his dedicated staff. I do get at least weekly reports, and sometime several times a week, so I am tracking expenditures. It started, though, with this concept that it's not all right to overspend the budget. I'm not used to that concept because in the state that I came from, it was illegal to actually overspend your budget. Here it isn't. In Rhode Island, it is not illegal to overspend. You have to go through a process of notifying the state, what have you. But it's not a great practice in terms of containing costs or whatever, so we've stopped that practice. So there isn't an expectation anymore that it's all right to overspend. All you need to do is go back to the council and ask them after the fact for an additional appropriation. And so we've instituted some financial measures that kind of take that off the table. I mean, the clear message to our staff is that the town council has the authority to set a budget, and we have the responsibility, barring any significant emergency, to live within that budget, that appropriation that has come forward from the council. So we're changing the mindset, and I think that has worked well so far.
Sounds like the family discussion we have at our house, and I'm sure you do too.
Sure.
So. Can you give us just a sense? I understand that you're working on next year's budget from a zero-based budgeting perspective. Can you give our viewers just a short tutorial on what zero-based budgeting, at least that which you are employing, really is all about?
It can become very complex very quickly, and there are different iterations of zero-based budgeting. But in its basic form, the concept is that every so often a municipality should break its budget down and make no assumptions about how many staff persons you need to run an operation or what your expenses should be. And there's a requirement, a lot of times for communities that even venture to employ a zero-based budgeting strategy. You usually don't see it every year because it takes a tremendous amount of work and manpower just to implement it. You usually see it implemented so that you're employing a zero-based budgeting strategy maybe once every 3 years or so, which is what I would recommend in this town. But it hasn't been done for I guess, many, many years. But basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be breaking these budgets down so there is no assumption to begin with in terms of budgeting. As you know, more communities than not use an incremental approach. So if they have a $2 million budget in a certain department this year, there's an assumption that that base has already been justified, and that increased costs, whether it be health insurance costs or cost of living increases or what have you, or other mandates, would require a certain percentage increase. So you're just seeing an incremental budget approach that always adds every year to the budget.
Sounds like the way we were doing business here before you got here.
Well, I am enthusiastic about the possibility of the zero-based budgeting approach, but as I said, it is going to take a tremendous amount of time on our part to accomplish it. That's why we will be starting it very shortly, so that we're up and running for the next fiscal year. And it is going to be introducing some concepts that some folks may not be used to. I mean, this idea that nothing is sacred, that you're breaking the budget down to its basic components. So if there are 30 staff people in a department, there needs to be justification for every one of those staff people in terms of and much more of a justification for any increased requests. You have decision packages, and there is much more thought about what you're going to get for that additional expenditure. So it puts the limelight and the focus much more on accountability for your budgeting, taking away the assumptions that, hey, I'm going to get what I got last year plus 2.5%.
It sounds very much like what probably happens in the private sector. Because if your marginal income is diminishing, you have to look around and find out why that's true and where you can cut some corners.
It also helps us in another area, and that is I've said since I've gotten here that it is clear that we are a community that tries to be all things to all people, and in this budgetary process it also requires that you think more seriously about setting priorities and saying, you know, what are your needs and what are your wants, and if we have limitations, which we do have in the future, what are our highest priorities? It makes you think about that more seriously, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, Gary Crosby was here last week, and we had a great discussion on the town's comprehensive plan, and he presented the notion that the periodic review of that comprehensive plan is underway, and we talked very briefly about what's the fiscal impact of the comprehensive plan, and if you can't tie that plan into your budgeting cycle, I don't know, how can you manage the future? How can we actually know roughly what we're going to look like 10 years from now without doing just exactly that?
We also don't really have a community-wide strategic plan, which we need to think about more seriously in the near future. Yeah.
Very good. You mentioned that the town council was making some hard decisions here recently, and what was this week like in the council chambers?
Well, we had a council meeting this past week, and the agenda appeared to be light, but it seems like it doesn't matter how small the agenda is. It seems like we usually go till 10 or 11 o'clock. But these are serious issues, and the most serious issue that was discussed was a decision to employ an engineering entity to actually put an RFP together at the Glen properties, and specifically the Elmhurst School, so that we can find out once and for all what the cost is going to be to both demolish the building, the so-called for the former school, and the chapel. Whether that's going to be included or not has to be decided in the future. But we don't have firm costs. And as you know, there's going to be a ballot question next spring, so the citizens of our town can decide once and for all whether or not they're in favor of employing a conservation easement on the entirety of the Glen properties, and part of that is a commitment of funds that it has been suggested would cover the cost of the demolishing of the school and then putting some type of basic park there in its stead. And so what we did is we had an engineering firm present 4 or 5 decision packages to the council because like everything else, it's very complex. It isn't a flat piece of land where you're just going to go in and have bulldozers, knock it down and cart it away. There are some tremendously complex. First of all, it's an old school. There's hazardous materials that are involved. There's drainage issues and topographical issues that are nightmares for engineers. And so it's much more complex. And you have utilities, for example, going into the school that thereafter go into the Glen Manor, and there's questions about what happens to all of that or whatever. So it's a complex development proposal. One of the engineers said it was the most challenging demolition project that he had seen in 30 years. And so but we're on top of it. The council made a decision to go ahead, so we will be issuing an RFP soon, and thereafter being able to tell our taxpayers and citizens what we're talking about in terms of costs.
Yeah, it's a multi-million-dollar decision and impacting the future of many generations of Portsmouth folks. So I suppose it's time to do it right, as they say.
The first time.
The first time.
Right.
Yeah, it is a terribly complex issue, I guess. The report out of the Pension Commission has resulted in something. Where do you stand with that?
The Pension Commission has filed a report with the Town Council making a series of recommendations, one of which is the rate of return projection, which is very important in terms of calculating the soundness of the pension plan itself. The Council took a vote of support of the recommendations of the Pension Commission, and now there's a series of recommendations which deal with changing the pension plan to make it more addressing some of the shortcomings in the plan itself. Those have to be negotiated. So we're in the process, or will be in the process over the next year, of negotiating all of the town's contracts. So the issue of pension reform will be front and center in those negotiations.
How is that going to stay in the public eye as we move forward towards those union negotiations?
Well, ultimately, the Town Council will have to take a vote on any contract changes. And obviously, this not only will be controversial, but it will be of interest to our citizens. And so I expect that there will be many opportunities over the next year to hear not only what is going on, but to give input to the Council in terms of people's expectations. But that really is at the core. We have a pension system that is that has a liability of being funded at less than 60% right now, and so we want to do what we have to do to put that on more sound footing. And it's nothing really that you can kick the can down the street for a while, but it's always going to come back to haunt you. So
is there any example locally in the state of Rhode Island of somebody, a town or city, that does not have an unfunded liability, that they've managed their pension?
I do know. I can't tell you off the top of my head what the names are. I do know that there are a variety of communities.
Stories.
There are success stories. There are some that have been more responsive, and there's a lot of communities that are a lot worse off than Portsmouth. And so, but at the end of the day, our responsibility is to our employees and to our taxpayers, and that's why we need to act, and we need to act as soon as possible.
There seems to be nationally a shift in the concept of public employee pension management back into the 401k kinds of things. Does that pretty much mirror what the federal government is doing presently?
Both the federal and the state.
And the state.
And you've seen pension reform at the state level as well. I mean, I can't really get into talking too much about what will be proposed, because that's part of the negotiating process, and I have to respect that process. But it's clear what we have doesn't work, and it's clear that what we have needs to be fixed, or we're really going to be. And this is the situation. I guess the bad news is that we have financial challenges. The good news is there's still time left to fix those challenges, but not a lot of time. We've got to act over the next year or two, or we're really going to be in some real difficulty.
The road project. I can see the activity in town. So it's moving on, and it's something that's very public exposed kind of an activity. So how is he doing? How's Dave Q doing?
Dave Q and his staff are doing terrific. We've received a lot of compliments. I guess the frustration is that the backload of work is so significant that the truth is that even with our huge new commitment to fix our roads, even though that's in place, it's going to take 4 or 5 years before you really can tell a difference in town. But we receive calls every week from folks that are just delighted that we're paying attention to our infrastructure, and I give this town council a tremendous amount of credit. There was a lot of competing challenges that we face, and this type of infrastructure stuff is always easy to kick the can down the road and put it aside for another year. But this town council said, no, we've done that enough. We're going to address these issues, and the dividends from that are being seen every day in town. That's
fantastic. And this is another completely obvious thing to everybody who flies by it, is that the wind turbine is coming to a point now where you're going to get recommendations for alternatives.
We have a two-pronged approach. First of all, we have gone far and wide to talk to the foremost experts in the country to assist us in trying to determine the best course of action. I mean, this isn't a public policy debate right now. This is a financial decision that the town has to make. We have a $2.3 million note, and we have to make a prudent business decision, void of how any of us might feel about alternative energy or whatever. That's really not on the table. So that's one avenue, and that is trying to figure out the most efficient way to fix that which we have. A very different route is being pursued as well, and that is to find out whether there can be a partnership with the private sector, and we will be receiving bids this week. We do know that there's some interest in the private sector to partner with the town, and we've allowed, the RFP has allowed for a great deal of innovation and creativity. I know that some private sector entities are looking to use our present machinery, so to speak, and some will be presenting proposals to actually take down what we have there and put up their own turbine. And so we really allowed for flexibility, but once again, no matter whether we go down one road or another, this is a business decision, a financial decision that needs to be made, and that is our focus at this time.
And that should be the council meeting that's going to deal with that is coming up here.
Yeah, the 24th, yes.
Oh, so you're busy. What else is going on that I might not be personally aware of?
Well, we're very pleased. Every so often, the Attorney General's office in Rhode Island puts on a statewide seminar on several issues. One issue is public records and making sure that towns understand their responsibilities to provide public records to our citizens or to interested parties. And the other issue is making sure that we all follow the open meetings law so that public decisions are made in the public. But not everyone can make a certain meeting on a certain night that's statewide or whatever, and through the leadership of Councilor Judy Staven, she spearheaded an effort to try to convince the Attorney General's office to have a seminar right here in Portsmouth. And so on October 15th, Monday night at 7 o'clock, we're having a forum, and we're trying to encourage as many members of certain various committees and commissions in town that deal with open meetings law issues and employees that deal with public records requests to attend this meeting, as well as the general public. We're certainly hoping that the session will be taped so that we can play it thereafter. And so I really applaud Councilor Staven for her leadership in convincing the Attorney General to come to Portsmouth to do this, because I think it serves the citizens well.
Yeah, very good. Anything else?
It's going to be a busy week next week. We have a special town council meeting dealing with wastewater issues. But one thing that I'll say about this town is it never slows down.
Yeah. So that's it, to focus once again on wastewater. We are rewriting our original ordinance.
Yes.
And the major thrust of the need for the rewrite was what?
I think that there's some concern that there needs to be some reevaluation of some of the mandates that are in it or whatever. One of the things that came up at this past last week's council meeting, though, was Phil Driscoll, who chairs our wastewater committee, has not made it clear to us that his committee, who is very knowledgeable and has been dealing with these issues for the last 7 or 8 years, they have an opportunity to review the recommended changes. So he asked at that meeting that next week that after we allow our citizens to comment on the proposed changes, that it be referred to his committee so that his committee can have an opportunity to, because one of the things he was saying is, you know, he can read the changes that are being proposed, but he doesn't understand why the attorney that the town has retained is recommending those. So he wanted to have an opportunity for his committee to sit down with the staff that were involved with recommending the changes so that they can understand the rationale, because he wants to, and I think the council needs to hear from his committee in terms of their recommendations as well. So I don't expect that there'll be action next week, final action, but that there'll just be a conversation so that we can better understand why the changes are being proposed.
Gotcha. I was up in the planner's office and talking to Gary Crosby, and my sister-in-law and her husband are looking for a home, and they were looking here in Portsmouth, so we went to the town hall. And I asked Gary what he had for records in terms of the ordinance, the original ordinance, saying that every system in the town needed to be documented and put on into the computer someplace, and so we could conform with the rules as we knew them. And they hadn't actually started at all.
That's right.
They have not put anything into the computer yet, so we are behind.
And we were supposed to hire a full-time
Yeah.
wastewater manager, and because of budget cuts or whatever, that was left on the cutting room floor. But
I met the gentleman who's doing it in Charleston. They have quite a sophisticated system because they've been doing it for quite a while now. But everything's on the computer. Every house, everything is all there instantly. So that's pretty good. Well, we've only got a couple more minutes to our session here. What's the personal Klimm story here? How is the family working out in Portsmouth here? Housing?
We have a home that we love, and we love this community. It reminds us, I've said this before, but it in many, many ways reminds us of the community that we came from 30 or 40 years ago. We had a tremendous amount of growth over the last 10 or 20 years, and unfortunately we lost some of the very character and charm that made the community that we came from very special. And so it's kind of nice. There's much more of a small town feel here in Portsmouth. I'm really every day surprised at the amount of volunteerism that goes on here on a day-to-day basis, and hope that most, if not all, residents really understand how blessed all of us are to be able to call Portsmouth our home.
Well, that's great. That's good to hear. You were brought here on a 2-year contract?
3.
On a 3-year contract.
Yes.
It's good. It's a long period of time. We're talking about the nature of life here, and we still have to fight with tractors to get down the road. And if you want to buy fresh vegetables, they're grown right here in Portsmouth.
And that's what's really special about Portsmouth.
We have it's unique, and the charm of the quasi farming world here. If I could just get the personal ordinance on chickens changed. I went to the town hall to check to see if I could put up a chicken coop, and the answer was, well, the zoning requires 50 feet to the chicken coop from your property line, and I marched it all off. And every time I did that, the chicken coop was inside some room in my house. So they were very thoughtful when they made that ordinance. They said, okay, we're going to eliminate the casual chicken coop, but at any rate.
And of course, what's wonderfully exciting is the fact that next year is the 375th anniversary of our town.
Absolutely.
And the work that Doug Smith and his committee are doing on the 375th is really exciting. And we really encourage people to get involved because it'll be a very special year next year.
Good. 375th. That's hard to believe we've been around that long. Anyway, that's the end of our program for today. We want to thank everyone for watching, and God bless.